"What do you want to be when you grow up?" asked the teacher. "Doctor, engineer, astronaut." But Elizabeth Holmes, at just 9 years old, confidently replied, "I want to be a billionaire." And she made it. Silicon Valley praised her. Investors gave her billions, but it was all a lie. From the fake persona she created to her sleazy tactics to manipulate her victims, we're covering it all. This is the story of the Theranos fraud, the $9 billion scam that almost got away with it. How did she do it? Stay until the end to find out. Welcome back to Rogue Invest. A girl with an obsession. Her story begins when, at just 19 years old, Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford University to launch her own company. At first, she called it Real-Time Shows, but fearing the name might generate skepticism, she decided to change it. She didn't want the word cure to raise doubts or suspicions, so she opted for a new name. Theranos, a fusion of therapy and diagnosis. From the very beginning, she understood that to sell her fraud, she first had to sell herself. She was inspired by Steve Jobs, mimicking his signature black turtleneck and cultivating an aura of a visionary genius. She adopted a deep, carefully rehearsed voice that gave her a sense of authority and confidence in a male-dominated world. But her real skill was in her ability to manipulate. Theranos was built on that story. Holmes claimed that her company was developing a device capable of diagnosing hundreds of diseases with just a drop of blood. She sold this idea with such confidence that even figures like Henry Kissinger, Rupert Murdoch, and the Walton family invested hundreds of millions without asking questions. However, almost none of the investors had experience in medicine, which allowed her to keep fueling the illusion without being questioned. The big lie of Theranos. Theranos promised a revolution, a simple finger prick to detect hundreds of diseases in minutes. It was an idea straight out of science fiction, but Holmes sold it as a certainty. However, there was one problem. None of it was possible with the available technology. Scientists knew this, but at Theranos, dissent was not an option. She knew how to bypass the law. When investors arrived at the headquarters to see the technology in action, Holmes led them into a spotless room with an Edison machine at the center. A drop of blood was taken, placed into the machine, and a few minutes later, results appeared on the screen. It was all a carefully choreographed spectacle. Once the investors left the room, an engineer would enter, remove the sample, and secretly send it to a lab where it was analyzed using conventional equipment. The investors never suspected a thing. They left convinced they had witnessed the future of medicine. To reinforce her story, Holmes forged documents. She placed the Pfizer logo on internal reports to make investors believe the pharmaceutical giant had validated her technology. She also presented a report from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, suggesting they had approved her device, when in reality, they had merely observed its operation. It was a perfectly designed scam. The fraud reaches the pharmacies. In 2013, Theranos announced a partnership with Walgreens and Safeway. Blood testing booths would be installed in their stores, allowing the public to access Theranos' technology. But the machines didn't work. Holmes knew that admitting the truth would bring everything crashing down. In yet another attempt to avoid prison, she found a solution: lie even more. Since they failed to obtain regulatory approval, Holmes exploited a legal loophole. Instead of analyzing the blood in stores, Theranos secretly sent it to a lab where the tests were conducted using machines from other companies. The problem was that these procedures weren't designed to work with such small samples. The tests produced wildly inaccurate results. Healthy patients received false cancer diagnoses, while those with real illnesses were sent home with normal results. Employees who raised concerns about these issues were fired or silenced with legal threats. Theranos spied on whistleblowers using private investigators and forced them to sign non-disclosure agreements under intimidation. Elizabeth Holmes's obsession. Holmes didn't just want to be rich, she wanted to be a legend. Inside Theranos, her cult of personality was absolute. She surrounded herself with sycophants and people who depended on her for their work visas, ensuring no one would question her. Alongside her business partner and secret boyfriend, Sunny Balwani, she established a reign of terror. Employees were spied on, worked under extreme pressure, and were fired for the slightest challenge. The media praised her as the woman who would revolutionize medicine, and Holmes relished every moment of her fame. She gave moving speeches about her uncle's death from cancer, claiming her mission was to prevent others from losing their loved ones. Later, it would be revealed that she wasn't even close to her uncle. It was just another lie. The fall of Elizabeth Holmes. In 2015, Wall Street Journal journalist John Carreyrou received an anonymous tip. Theranos is a fraud. He began investigating, reaching out to former employees, doctors, and patients. As he uncovered the truth, he realized the deception was bigger than anyone had imagined. When Holmes found out about the investigation, her reaction was not that of an innocent person. She asked Rupert Murdoch to kill the story. Murdoch had invested $125 million in Theranos, but refused. She sued former employees and harassed them with legal threats. She hired private investigators to follow whistleblowers, but it was too late. In 2016, regulators inspected Theranos and discovered the tests were an absolute disaster. The Edison machines failed in more than 50% of analyses. Results varied by as much as 146%. The syphilis test was only 65% accurate. Theranos was shut down in 2018, and Holmes was charged with fraud. The last attempt to avoid prison. When facing trial, Holmes changed her strategy. She blamed her ex-boyfriend, accusing Sunny Balwani of manipulating and emotionally abusing her. Shortly before the trial, she became pregnant, a move many saw as an attempt to soften her image and avoid prison. With tears in her eyes, she tried to convince the jury that she never intended to harm anyone, that it had all been a simple misunderstanding, and used the birth of her 2 children with the excuse of them growing up without a mother. She wanted to be seen as a strong, masculine woman when everything was going her way, but when the consequences for her actions came for her, she resorted to playing the weak woman card. Nothing was her fault. She was just an innocent woman. It was everyone else's fault. They were the manipulators and abusers. But in the end, the evidence was undeniable. In 2022, Holmes was sentenced to 11 years in prison for fraud. Luckily, she was a woman and not a man, or she would have been sentenced way more harshly. Biggest fraudster in Silicon Valley. Elizabeth Holmes was not a misunderstood visionary. She was a fraudster who put thousands of lives at risk for her own gain. She deceived billionaires, doctors, patients, and regulators. Her story serves as a warning about how far lies can go when combined with charisma, power, and a lack of scrutiny. The most disturbing part? To this day, Holmes likely still believes she just needed more time to make her dream a reality. As she once said, "When you have a backup plan, you're admitting you're not going to succeed." The only problem is that, in real life, frauds don't have happy endings. Was Elizabeth a visionary or just a fraud? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Let us know in the comments what other great scams you'd like to learn about. Stay informed, unplug from the Matrix. See you next time. This was Rogue Invest.